Greetings. Today I finally received a record I'd almost given up hope of arriving, Südamerikanische Rhythmen, which is German for South American Rhythms. It was produced by a German record label, Baccarola, sometime in the late 50s or early 60s as far as I can tell. It may seem like an obscure record, although some from that generation in Germany might know about it, but on this record is a song called Cuba Bion by Kurt Drabeck and his orchestra, which has become somewhat well known lately thanks to Techmoan, who has made it famous through his demonstration of the Tefifon and his background music for his humorous puppet shows. I happen to like the song too, and I became curious how the sound quality on a standard vinyl LP compares with the Tefifon. When I played the record, I immediately noticed that the pitch was lower than the output from Techmoan's Tefifon. Very odd. I know that the speed of my turntable is correct here, as you can see on the stroboscope, and the record is clearly labeled for 33 RPM, which is really shorthand for 33 1/3. So what could account for this difference? Am I missing something? Or was Techmoan's Tefifon actually playing it slightly too fast? The first thing that occurred to me was, could it have to do with the frequency of the alternating current being 50 Hz versus 60 Hz? Seems unlikely, since Germany and the UK both use a frequency of 50 Hz for their AC, so Techmoan shouldn't have had any problems there, and although the US uses 60 Hz AC, my turntable is verifiably spinning at 33 1/3 RPM, just as a turntable in Germany or the UK would. I recorded the output of my turntable into the Audacity sound editing program and then imported the output of Techmoan's Tefifon so I could compare the output from the two sources side by side. I found that the Tefifon is about 6.17% faster than the LP output. There's absolutely nothing I can find in my setup here that would account for that amount of variation, so I can only conclude that it must be due either to variation in the pressings by the record company, or else maybe the Tefifon is in fact playing a bit too fast. I somehow doubt that though, because Techmoan did mention in his Tefifon video that it took 51.93 seconds for one of his 60-minute tapes to run a full loop. Given that the Tefifon tapes are specified to run at 19 centimeters a second, and given that a typical Tefifon tape has 69 tracks across its width, including those two ending tracks, by my calculations, it would take about 991.3 centimeters, or about 32.5 feet of tape for it to run at 60 minutes, and at 19 centimeters a second, it should take 52.17 seconds to make a full loop, which is only about 0.05% off from Techmoan's observations, and undoubtedly well within the machine's originally specified tolerances. So why is there this apparent difference in the playback speed between the Tefifon and my LP? I am at a loss to explain it. I'm not sure whether the speed of the Tefifon or the LP is closer to what Kurt Drabeck originally laid down in the studio, but for the purpose of comparing the sound quality of the two media, I figured I might as well match the Tefifon, since Techmoan did have the song first. After speeding up my recording 6.17% in Audacity and then getting the beats aligned as nearly as possible, I was able to compare the output very easily with a click of the mouse. You might notice that the beats seem to be lined up at the beginning and at the end, but in between they still don't always match. How can this be? Most likely answer is WoW and Flutter in one or maybe both of the devices. What's WoW and Flutter, you ask? Broadly speaking, it's a term used to refer to low and high speed irregularities in playback. WoW and Flutter is always present to some degree with any analog device, especially if it's lower end, but it's usually not audibly discernible unless the device is old and has something like a glazed or cracking rubber piece or a binding metal part in need of lubrication. WoW and Flutter can be exacerbated, however, by irregularities in the medium itself, for example by things like warped records, records with off-center pressings, or stretched tapes. But getting back to our vinyl Tefifon comparison, both of these media are likely to have varying degrees of WoW and Flutter, which probably accounts for the irregularities in beat alignment we see here. Another issue I've seen in various comments online is the tinniness and lack of bass response in the Tefifon output, with some people wondering if it needed an equalization curve applied like the Recording Industry Association of America, or RIAA curve. The RIAA curve de-emphasizes low frequencies and boosts high frequencies on recording and applies the inverse function on playback, boosting the low frequencies and de-emphasizing the high frequencies so that the frequency response on playback is roughly flat as intended. The RIAA curve is used this way on phonograph records because low frequencies generally have more amplitude than high frequencies. By de-emphasizing low frequencies, the width of the grooves can be lessened, resulting in longer playing times. Narrower grooves also help to reduce tracing distortion and groove damage that could result from the stylus wobbling around in a wider groove. As an experiment, I tried applying the RIAA equalization curve to the Tefifon sample in Audacity, as well as some other curves. In the end, I decided that the Western Electric curve sounded the best for the Tefifon, but let me play some samples here so you can decide for yourself. One final question I've seen in comments is, why did Techmoan not need to run his Tefifon through a phonotype preamp which might have provided the needed equalization? Well, if you look at the insides of his machine, you might notice that SK451 designation on the pickup cartridge. A Google search reveals it to be a ceramic or piezoelectric pickup. It works on a totally different principle from the magnetic pickups typically used in modern phonographs. I won't get into how it works here, but suffice it to say that the output of a piezoelectric cartridge is about 60 to 70 times greater than a typical moving magnet cartridge, so there is absolutely no need for a preamp to raise the level of the Tefifon output. However, what the Tefifon makers did for equalization remains a mystery. So how do the LP and the Tefifon compare in terms of overall sound quality? Personally, I'd say this equalization experiment shows that there is clearly enough sonic detail stored in those Tefifon grooves to be considered a true hi-fi machine. To my ear, the equalized Tefifon output compares very favorably to the LP. Thanks for watching.